Yo, I want to get something out of my chest real quick. I want to try to give y'all some experience knowledge over my over 10 years of watching the product that is professional wrestling. And that is whenever people debate over the past of professional wrestling and some set of current product, the most they'll give out for most of the positives they have for the current stability of wrestling, even though it's lack of mainstream, lack of, cooler moments, the lack of edge, or any semblance of a mainstream identity for pro wrestling, is that the pro wrestling is better than how it was over 20 years ago. And if that was the fact, then most feds right now would be at least a counterpart as memorable as TNA was back in like the mid 2000s. So I don't understand where's that claim coming from. Because of course people want to act smart as hell for some apparent reason, thinking that uh you know sure we're not as mainstream, or most of our matches aren't that memorable, or we consistently no sell, but it's on the standpoint that the wrestling is way better than back in the day when you just had swerves, cool moments, adult adult content, and a whole lot of badass memorable characters. That already like outweighs characters, because we have guys doing Canadian destroyers on thumbtack filled ring aprons and breaking their necks, and they're still trying to go 30 minutes into the match. It's probably the most dumbest claim I've ever had, because people are like downplaying how much like some of the guys that we actually had that were doing more impressive stuff, that was like a common occurrence in professional wrestling anyway. And back then they were able to do this at least in the daily matter, where some of these dudes like back in the 70s or like 80s were doing like 20 minute to like 60-minute matches. And most of it is completely dumbfounded to me, like Chris Jericho, Steve Austin, Bret Hart, even some of the guys that you don't think are like, oh, impressive technical workers, are not impressive enough to like wow you guys in the specific work rate standard. Because how much like Dave Meltzer think that unless you're part of the top list, people are not going to put you in acclaimed professional wrestler. And I don't understand that. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. And I've seen YouTubers like determine how decent a wrestler is all because they were like at least a fed, or a certain amount of wrestlers, all because they weren't like in the Dave Meltzer 5-star ranks. They didn't have a popular work rate in it, or they didn't have a Canadian destroyer, or was telling a basic simplistic story. And they were having an entertaining match and everybody was into it. I don't understand why that's not determined into a match, but the way if the match was longer, I hate that in a conversation. Sure, if the match was fun, it was fast paced, and still the fans were like like screaming, getting hyped, or like keeping their energy all the way over to a match. I could understand if you want the matches to be a bit longer, and sometimes that's good because that gets you more doors to see these guys continue wrestling, and that's always nice to hear. But dude, some of y'all be like, "Fight forever," when the guy's like no selling or German suplexes and doing exploder suplexes, breaking his neck, and he's still kicking out of like one. It's like making no sense. And like the more I exploited this from like 2015 and like 2016, it's like, wow, this match is crazy, but when is it going to end? That's my thing on it. Maybe that's something with me being an old head or something, but I'd rather watch like The Godfather versus Saudi Vega and Chris and like X Pac than freaking Ricochet, Will Ospreay, and freaking El Phantasma and Finn Balor having a pissing contest while they're trying to like you know try out to be a Power Ranger. Like, I'm not impressed. It's probably because they don't have the specific sort of charisma, or it takes them way too long to even establish themselves. They don't have an identical personality unless they're booked to have it, or they don't have anything that splits them out from any other guy that can do the exact same crap, except it depending on the type of relationships they have with certain guys in the wrestling business. Like, that's my opinion on the matter. Do I think that I give them I give them way too much hate? Supposedly, but like this is like the established shit I've been getting, because some people are like being that sure, the current 2020 roster isn't as popular, but it is as good, but it has better in-ring talent than than back in the Attitude Era to 2000s, and that makes very fucking little sense. I'm sorry, all because you can do a Canadian destroyer from the middle of the ring like 7 times doesn't make you an impressive wrestler. It just makes you more athletic, and you'll get that over time. Some younger guys will get more advanced their genes, they'll be able to go faster, and that's expected. The same thing with football, the same thing with basketball, the same thing with hockey. It's going to be more simplified, it's going to be more quicker, it's going to be more faster, just to get your urges out there, and it's not going to be as consumable as back then when nearly every other move mattered. It is dependent on a storyline or at least a more, outside the box way it ends, that it keeps you hooked in a match. Oh, and they actually had personality. I'm just being serious. I don't, and I'm not trying to bury most of the roster, because I know these are hardworking individuals, and they probably had a lot of time until they got called up to like a top company like WWE or any other Fed, if we're counting AEW or Impact. But besides that, what kind of defining like character that they have from at least somebody from the Attitude Era or like Ruthless Aggression? I'm not trying to bury them. Tell me the character of Finn Balor. And if you look in like most of like the freaking, because they have info on the guy when you click on the wrestler, most of them are be like they wrestled all over the world. They'll barely bring up a defined personality about them or most of their mythos, or at least make a character for them, except that they were hardworking and they wrestled around the world. You'll have some information from what Fed they worked on before, or at least what kind of lineage they have, but that's like transparent. I swear, nobody's gonna bring up most what's interesting about Nikki Cross. No one's gonna bring up anything a bit interesting unless you bring up La Sombra or something like that for Andrade. There's nothing that comparably interesting about Bayley, Sasha Banks, I'm sorry, or Becky Lynch, or sometimes Charlotte, because of course we know that she's a daughter of Ric Flair, and then there's nothing else overly like makes her different from anything else except she has a vagina. Sorry, Vegeta. And Seth Rollins hasn't done anything cool since the Shield. Sorry, that's just true. And most of the other rosters are just indie trash, forgettable NXT mid card midgets that either are given way too much TV time. Some of the guys actually try to build and have personality, and it freaking inflicts me. Like the way that they're trying to get certain dudes over, it kind of gets me annoyed because I want to see like freaking Elias at least be given like what Jeff Jarrett was given from like the 2000 from like the year 2000 back in the back in WCW. And as people wanted to proclaim it as trash, at least it kept you hooked. At least you remember some stuff from this year. From the past 2 years of WWE, you could barely remember even like the top 10 matches unless What Culture put it up. And that's because they're bored and their content is proclaimingly worse. Like, I'm not taking like wrestling advice from idiots that said that Roman Reigns and The Rock is a terrible match for WrestleMania for some apparent reason. But they'll feel like The Fiend versus The Undertaker is obviously going to be a money making match. I don't get that. I don't. They're probably going to say that. And of course, They had a failed wrestling fed. Remember WCPW? And they blew in all that money off for like regular free agents to like star up so they can just have their work rate fest BS so they can smirk over all the money they had over a million subs. And they couldn't support themselves after all. And then they had to fire most of the guys because Blumpy is a sexual deviant. And then they changed their name to Defiant. And then their Fed died like a few years later. Absolute trash. If you take actual journalistic advice from woke culture, you're a bit lost, bro. And I'm not trying to bury woke culture, but they're absolute smart idiot a-holes that think like professional wrestling should be comparable over to the freaking Premier League. They'll do unnecessary top 10 lists that they probably did a few years back. And some information that people already probably know or don't even that care about. Like, what do I not know about about like Nikki Cross? Oh, cool. That was a hope that was a nice video. Come on. But more on the topic of like the current product of wrestling is the in-ring work of wrestling is better than what it was 20 years ago. So why aren't they getting newer fans? I don't understand that claim. If you're proclaiming that the in-ring work is better, then you should be getting newer viewership. You should be getting a bigger growth of fans. You should be getting a more show proclaim of popularity. And that should be apparent if you're saying that stuff is better. There's still gonna be fans of the NFL, there's still gonna be fans of the NBA, and that's the mainstream appeal of it. There is barely anything mainstream appeal about the current product of WWE. And people still want to be like the in-ring talent is better, yet they won't even remember the last 10 Charlotte matches. Nobody are gonna bring up like the best Seth Rollins matches unless they bring up some people that are actually more popular than Seth Rollins. And the least memorable matches that I've seen were somewhat from Drew McIntyre. Roman Reigns had underrated matches for some apparent reason, and they'll be like he's been getting carried, yet he had the most memorable spots. And yes, it comes from the guys that he beaten taking cool sick bumps, but that comes with the job of getting himself over. And he's done a well done job of that because people at least know his move set. I'm sorry, but doing kicks and suicide dives, like for most of your ability, only comes with the territory that you actually have a memorable gimmick. Nearly everybody does kicks and a suicide dive. I don't think that's impressive. Like Roman Reigns do razor edge power bombs. He does cool Superman punches. He does a spear. He has a definable look. He looks like $1,000,000. And he has a lineage in the company that he's actually using as a literal episodic storyline on SmackDown that's actually getting people to actually talk positive about WWE. And when's the last time you actually heard about something like that? It actually comes in the territory of people actually whining that they finally wanted Roman Reigns to become heel. I'm just saying. Like, you don't see anybody else here in the company pushing the needle. No definitive star coming out of Seth Rollins unless he gets a whiny heel persona that he had a god complex gimmick, and probably when he comes back he's gonna be babyface, probably. The feud with Roman in the future, or some crap like that. He has a squeaky ass voice, scrushy neck beard. The guy always has wet hair. His Defiant moveset doesn't even change up when he's babyface or heel, and he has no semblance of a charisma. Some SJW midget loser that, of course, I can say his moveset, and nothing can pull it apart from what he did as a babyface except that he targets an area sometimes. Like he'll do a blockbuster from the top, superplex into another, like I think of Falcon Arrow, roll up to a super kick, suicide dives. I don't even know why you're heel and you do suicide dives. That always boggles my mind. Why do something that puts you in a higher risk when you're supposed to be contained as a selfish human being if you're a heel? I don't understand that. Unless like you have like the personality of a psychopath and you're heel, I can understand that, but that makes no sense. They have completely forgotten the concept of what makes a heel sometimes. And I could be like there's guys like that currently, that gets me invested because I have a definitive character. Like I have that about MJF, but some of the segments involving Chris Jericho did make me like a smeensy weensy, like kind of doubt MJF's growth over a character coming from like a one percenter douchebag that that can manipulate everybody, has a sharp tongue, and uses generic heel persona, and that's good enough to make it concernable heat. And he comes around making these dance segments, and I understand it's all again in Jericho's good side to see what he's doing with the Dark Order, but it just declines his persona of being taken seriously. If you catch my drift, the same thing with Elias. That disappoints the hell out of me because he comes around obviously when the crowd was here. Crowd was back in WWE. Anything like generic heel heat, he makes that feel conductive as hell. He can actually sing. The guy actually looks like a wrestler, and he's not that bad in the ring, and he actually has a personality. He actually has certain charisma, and anything he can say, he'll get a certain reaction. You barely see guys do that, even if they try to push them, and that's coming from Seth Rollins. This guy has a resume of nearly a Hall of Famer now, and still nobody can remember some of the matches that he had except against Roman, probably Lesnar, like freaking John Cena, Triple H, and people are like, oh my god, did you see his matches that he had with Murphy or Miz or Ziggler? Nobody's gonna remember that. That's just my opinion on the matter. And to think for most of this time, I would be like, I agree. There's obviously some coolish spots that I see in most of the matches, but that doesn't pertain to it being memorable because everybody can do it. Everybody can do a kip up. Everybody can do the Canadian Destroyer. Some guy's gonna kick out a one after getting hit with like 27 super kicks with no semblance of selling any sort of damage if they repetitively get hit in that one specific spot. Like there's no realism value into it, and that's what kills off the product. And they think that this is way better from like back in the 90s when at least a chair shot to the head could concuss a person. A low blow literally goes up to the head, literally could spike up your dome, and you can be hit for like a 3 count by the spot. When crazy stuff happens and you can actually talk to your friends about it. Now, talking about wrestling feels like you're cringily trying to talk about anime. Anime is more popular than it was like from like nearly 20 years ago, so at least you know a specific line of people. I mean, sure they're nerds, but some regular people, you can be like, oh, you watch current anime? Like, yes, you could talk about that. Barely anybody wants to talk about pro wrestling. And it's sad that I have to name it the wrestling community, even though there was a time when literally talking about, oh my god, did you see what Stone Cold Steve Austin did on Raw? And you can actually talk to like children and adults or teens at what happened on that episode. Like that's how depressing it's been. And if somebody again like tells me that they'd rather watch Drew Gulak versus like Daniel Bryan overseeing like any type of jobber or mid carder from like freaking Gilbert versus the Hurricane for like the hardcore title. I'd rather watch that because at least I know those guys have definable gimmicks and they're actually entertaining. Like the most definable lower carder that they have on WWE, it is not on in work, like in ring work. God, stop! It's on like their personality and gimmick and actually getting a connection over the crowd. That's our truth. Hate to break it to you, but I'd rather watch if there were 60 R Truths on the main roster. I'd rather watch all of that than the rest of the lower card. Humberto Carrillo sucks. Drew Gulak sucks. Nikki Cross sucks. Naomi is overrated. Her finisher is literally just pressing her thick ass on your face and then thinking that you're gonna last over 3 seconds without asking, "Are you gonna sit on it?" And the, oh god, who else sucks? Rollins sucks. I'm shocked that he's even that profitable in the company, to be honest. Other than he's a yes man God, Tucker sucks. Ricochet has potential, but he sucks at this moment. But he's been working on stuff. Retribution entirely sucks. All of them. All of them suck. I'm sorry. Not really, but still. This is just my opinion. Oh God, most of the guys, like 70% of the dudes on NXT are abysmal. And anybody who tells me to review that, please tell me I'm not watching 2 hour Ring of Honor. It's really not wasting my time with that. At least, at least over AEW, they actually have definitive names that people can name other than Finn Balor, Shotzi Blackheart, Karrion Kross, at the Undisputed Era, Velveteen Children Dream. What school did you go to? And Johnny Gargano, Ciampa, and Candice LeRae. And that's if you are like a diehard on NXT. If you tell a fan about NXT, they're just gonna be like, "Oh, I remember something. It's that developmental thing. Who made it that back then? Who's going to the main roster?" Now, now they want to make it a definitive third brand party BS to give it a reason to still have a televised slot. When literally the most charismatic guy that can actually make headlines on your freaking 2 hour Wednesday show is not even the NXT champion. It's freaking Pat McAfee, and that's depressing. Enough that you have a podcasting retired NFL punter getting more headlines on your product than your actual world champ and a world former top guy that was holding it for longer than Finn Balor. And I don't want to bury the hell out of NXT, but that's what you get. And after over all the headlines Sting been getting, dude, it makes sense. Because that's an actual household name. Pat McAfee is a household name. Because the NFL, people that watch NFL know who Pat McAfee is. No one from NFL knows what a Finn Balor is. No, 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 stop. Just stop it. You're embarrassing yourselves at this point. 600 is not going to shake the ratings. I swear probably WWE ECW had higher ratings than current NXT on television. And that was when they were on Sci-Fi. But back on the final thing, so just guys, just know that there's a different type of pro wrestling other than the paste. It's just the same repetitive indie garbage BS that they want to adapt to try to keep their hardcore fans still viewing their product so they can have a decent sum. And if you're putting that into like any sort of dispense, people watch the WWE network not only to just watch your dumb pay-per-views, they actually watch it so they can actually watch on something good. And that's from stuff like nearly 20 years ago. That's the reason why I have the network. I never want to rewatch, like, if I missed out on a few months of Raw. I have the network to this point to watch stuff that I don't want to watch with the current product. I watched 2000. I watch episodes that I watch as a kid. I watched Live Sex Celebration. I watched when Lashley literally jumped out of a steel cage. I watched when Matt Hardy leg dropped Edge from a steel cage. I watched the Reign of Terror saga of Triple H. And people always bring it up like Triple H sucked. At least he was a definable character. And is I'm not trying to rag on too much. At least there's improvements from earlier from the year, from like this, from the current product how it is right now. But I just need that I just I just need that argument completely done set. Like if I hear again that the current in ring product is better than it was 20 years ago, then not a lot of people shouldn't be then a lot more people outside of pro wrestling fans would be able to watch your product and then some highlight moments. Nobody's gonna waste like a total like 7 hours to watch most of your stuff. But that's it coming from me and stop and with this 24-minute tirade. But that's practically the rant. Could have made this shorter, but I wanted to sum out most of the detailing and most of the evidence that I had why I have an issue with that certain argument. Other than that, I hope you guys will enjoy the video. Like, comment, and subscribe. Obviously, I'm going to do my SmackDown review or some BS. I don't know if I'm still going to do it live, though. That's my thing. Because I'm better at, like, just waiting, rewatching, and consuming all I've watched until I have a definitive critique, other than doing a live reaction, even though these things are pre-taped, so there's no point of even trying to stream these out. So, that's just my opinion on the matter. So, hopefully you guys, enjoyed the video.